Today, I want to talk about loneliness, toughness, and perfectionism. 3 things that will derail your painting journey. And I want to start today by talking about toughness. This was especially relevant to this painting that you're watching me make in this video, and I'll explain why. So, on this channel, quite a bit, and with my students that I mentor, I talk a lot about how to make your painting journey efficient, how to improve as efficiently as possible, how to be able to see and track progress in your paintings. And that's great. It's really important to be able to set a goal and work linearly toward that goal rather than kind of ping-ponging between different skill sets that you're testing and ultimately not see meaningful progress towards the goal that you're most excited about. But there is a downside to this, and I've talked about this kind of downside in several different videos. But the downside of working really hard and specifically focusing intently on seeing progress in your painting practice is that can be something that leads you to burnout. I've talked about this before in terms of doing daily painting challenges, and I think this is also applicable when you have a really clear goal and you're intent on reaching it. And the reason is effectively whether you are doing a 30-day painting challenge and you are painting every single day, or you are doggedly pursuing a particular goal with your work, that involves a lot of work and not a lot of breaks. Now, with like a 30-day challenge, those breaks might look like taking a day off. But when it comes to pursuing your goals, that might look like giving you a painting off. Now, I'll explain what I mean. So this is exactly what you're seeing with this painting that's unfolding in this video. So lately in my own paintings, I have been exploring a new technique of building up the paint on the canvas. It's a much drier and more impressionistic approach. And that's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed mixing things up and pushing myself and trying something new. But I found that I can only push myself for so long before I start to preemptively feel exhausted when I think about painting. Now, if you're wondering what this feeling might be for yourself, like what that actually looks like, imagine if you are working out at the gym and every single workout you do is harder than the last. You might be really grateful for those workouts. You might be super excited for what those workouts are going to unlock for you. But there might be this part of you that just dreads the butt kicking you're inevitably going to get. And you might think, well, I barely made it through the last workout and today's going to be even tougher. How am I going to get through this? And I think the same thing can happen when we go to paint. If every painting is meant to challenge us that little bit more, it's easy for this to feel like we're Sisyphus. And instead of noticing just how much progress we make every time we push ourselves, what we actually are more likely to notice is just how much harder every subsequent painting becomes. So with this painting, I really intentionally mixed things up. That is to say, I gave myself a break. I let myself go back into my comfort zone, and I worked in a way that felt more intuitive and that didn't really feel like a push. Or to put it another way, I worked in a way that I knew I could be really successful at. So when I looked at my reference and I thought through how I would build up the paint on the canvas, I know exactly what that looks like. I know what the act of painting is going to look like. I know what the finished product is going to look like. And that feels like something fun. And so that's really what I planned for in this painting. I planned for it in terms of choosing a reference where when I looked at the reference, I knew what the final painting would look like. I didn't have any big question marks or problems to solve between the reference and the final painting, which is to say, my final painting should pretty much look like that reference. I don't have to change what the model is wearing, or change the light on her, or invent interesting color. In short, the reference told me exactly where to go, and I knew that when I looked at it, I was set up for success. I could also visualize my way through the painting. So I knew that I would start with a Gamsol wash, and then I would go and I would block in or simply draw in the key facial features and light and shadow pattern. Then, again, still diluted with a little bit of Gamsol, I would block in the basic color, and then switching from Gamsol to medium to thin my paint, I would then go ahead and build up some of the nuance of that color and build up the paint texture, which would take me to the end of the painting. I also had a very clear sense of what my palette would be for this piece and what brushes I would use. So my palette for this particular piece is essentially what I use as my standard portrait palette. So basically what you can expect me to use in just about any video on this channel. And that is titanium white, permanent rose, transparent oxide red, and transparent oxide brown. I did have yellow ochre on my palette, but it wasn't necessary for this particular painting. Then Terra Rosa, Viridian, and Ultramarine Blue Deep. That's it. That was the entire palette that I used. Now, if the composition of this piece, if the color harmony had been a little bit more pulled toward yellow, I probably would have used that yellow ochre. But that was it. I really didn't need to pull out any other colors. I did wind up using Sennelier King's Blue, which is effectively just ultramarine mixed with titanium white. I used that as a convenience color, but it wasn't really necessary. It just was very helpful given that that kind of sky blue color existed throughout this painting, and it just sped up my painting process. I also looked at this and I knew that I could build up the entire painting with effectively one kind of brush, which was a rosemary ivory long filbert in various sizes. So I started with a larger size and I worked my way down to the detail brushes. And then to give me a sense of what I would want to do as far as style, when I looked at this reference and I thought about my plan for this painting, one artist really immediately came to mind, and that was Frances Bell. I haven't really studied her work quite a bit before, but when I looked at this particular reference, I thought, okay, I know what that final painting should look like, and I can see how I could use this particular reference to explore some of the ways that she solves problems in her paintings. And so I had a couple of Frances Bell paintings pulled up, and I looked at that for inspiration of how to handle the edges on the hair or the way in which the figure blends into the background. When all of those questions are answered, the question of, can I see the final painting in the reference? Do I know what my palette's going to be? Do I know what brushes are going to use? Do I have examples of paintings that are going to help me in terms of guiding my style and the particular technique I'm going to use for paint application? When you have solved all those problems, you are set up for success with a painting. This is something that I help my students walk through every day, and I find that when students are really cognizant of each of these things, they make really excellent paintings. So often the reason that we struggle in a painting is that we have skipped a planning step, not because we are lacking in a particular technique. And if you want my guidance to figure that piece out, I have a link below in the description to apply to work with me. With that being said, I want to relate this concept back to the idea of toughness. So at the start of this video, I talked about how loneliness, toughness, and perfectionism derail your painting journey. And I see this one as toughness because really the act of giving myself a break from this painting was me letting myself take a break from being tough, or saying, you don't have to be tough all the time. You don't have to be pushing and trying something new and working on paintings that are constantly harder and harder and harder. As a result, when I'm working with my students, one of my immediate check-ins, if I realize that a student is in a place of frustration, is one, figuring out what the cause of that frustration is, and then two, figuring out what could very quickly ameliorate that situation. So, for instance, I had a student who was working really hard on improving her portrait practice. She was really focusing on drawing and capturing a likeness accurately, but she had done this to the point where it was starting to feel repetitive, and she really felt herself treating this more like work. And treating something like work can be really helpful. Like, it helps us to show up really intentionally. But in her case, I could see that the prevailing emotion for her was feeling worn out or feeling frustrated. And so immediately I said, okay, let's put a pin in this. And then from here, I want you to refer back to the notes that I had her take this whole time. And I said, what is the one exercise that really stands out to you that feels just joyful? It feels like a release. You're having fun. And it turned out she had several animal paintings that she really wanted to paint, and she knew how she could set herself up for success to have fun with those and really explore the color and the brushwork and stress out less about things like the drawing. So from there, my number one priority was setting her up to go ahead and have that experience, to have that mental and emotional reset. And the result was that she had a really great time. She had a really fun painting, and her brain got back in this space of thinking of her painting journey as something that is really enjoyable, which is essential for all of us. If we're going to be working toward our painting goals in the long term, if it's something we consider a slog, we're going to burn out. But if it's something where we think of this as being really invigorating and exciting and just like a nice release at the end of the day, we're going to be able to approach it with a lot more enthusiasm. And that's ultimately going to give us a lot more energy to work efficiently and improve our painting practice more effectively. And I think this illustrates just why it can be such a trap to value toughness in your painting practice, because there is a point where in valuing staying tough and like really sticking to a plan and trying to force yourself to, work harder and get better every single painting on one linear path, this can actually really set us back in the long term. So I would really encourage you to think in terms of how you can be really intentional with your painting practice while also being kind to yourself and being really strategic with your own use of breaks or your ability to mix things up and just keep your painting practice fun and intrinsically rewarding. This dovetails really nicely into a quick thought on perfectionism. So I have an entire video on perfectionism and painting and why perfectionism holds you back. I'll link that above and in the description if you haven't already checked that out. But in short, there was something that I heard recently that I really wanted to comment on, and this was a Winston Churchill quote, that perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think that is absolutely true, and it is very relevant here. If you are so hell-bent on making progress or being perfect that you don't give yourself room to breathe and rest and recharge and recenter, it's going to hold you back. I would much rather have a student of mine show up consistently and have intentional breaks be a part of their painting practice than work with an artist who plunges themselves into their work 40 hours a week and winds up like really plowing through exercises that they don't find enjoyable, because I know what comes on the other side of that. It may look really productive or valuable in the short term, but in the long term, those painters aren't really able to stick with their practice. So I would really encourage you to take this to heart. Don't let perfection hold you back from consistency and progress and enjoying your painting practice. And then the final thing that I want to touch on here is loneliness. I have made a video on this already. Again, I will link this above. But one thing that really helped me to overcome burnout was realizing the role that working in isolation alone in my studio had on my mindset when painting. And as a result, I realized that I really needed to prioritize making painting a social activity. Now, I'm not able to do this every time I paint, but when I do have opportunities to paint with people that I enjoy spending time with, whether they're painting or they're just keeping me company, I have really seen the effects of this ever since I made that video, and this has only continued to fuel my painting practice. So whatever you can do to essentially foster connection with other people, whether that's other painters in a local art community, or whether that's an opportunity to bring friends of yours into your studio to paint them from life, those things really do make a difference. So those are my top 3 things that I have found that can derail a painting journey. I would love to hear from you. What have you found that was really disruptive to your own painting growth, and what have you implemented instead to create consistency and to see consistent progress? Let me know in the comments, and if that's something you want my help doing, again, check out the link in the description to apply to work together with me. All right, until next time, I wish you very happy painting.